A seasoned Coast Guard captain who believed only in tides and time, a mother whose only remaining weapon was a desperate prayer, and a boy lost to the unforgiving, empty sea. If you believe in the power of a mother's prayer, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. The story you are about to hear is a testament to a faith that refused to let go. The grey light of dawn did little to soften the scene on the windswept beach. It was a landscape of managed chaos. The howling wind whipped at the yellow emergency tape, which cordoned off a section of the shore. A makeshift command post, battered by the salt spray, served as the nerve center for a search that everyone knew was nearing its grim conclusion. At the center of this operation stood Captain Eva Rostova of the Coast Guard. She was a woman forged by the sea itself, her face etched with the lines of 1,000 storms, and her eyes holding the pragmatic, unsentimental clarity of someone who deals in life and death as a matter of procedure. For 12 agonizing hours, her teams had scoured the churning cold waters. Now protocol dictated the shift from a rescue mission to a recovery operation. Her sharp gaze fell upon a small figure standing near the water's edge, a woman named Clara, whose shoulders were wrapped in a thin blanket that offered little protection against the brutal wind. For 12 hours, Clara had not moved from that spot. Her eyes, red-rimmed but fiercely focused, remained fixed on the horizon, searching for her 7-year-old son, Leo, who had been swept away by a rogue wave during a family outing the previous afternoon. Captain Rostova approached a small cluster of reporters and volunteers. Her voice was firm, cutting through the wind. "At 0600 hours, she announced, her tone leaving no room for argument, "we are officially suspending the active search for the missing child. The water temperature, the strength of the currents, and the time elapsed give us a 0% probability of survival. This is now a recovery mission. I want to thank the volunteers. You can all go home." The words hung in the air, a formal procedural death sentence. A collective sigh of despair went through the small crowd, but Clara did not move. It was as if she hadn't heard. Exasperated, Captain Rostova walked over to her. The investigators' job was to manage the scene, and that included managing hope. "Ma'am," she said, her voice not unkind but stripped of all softness, "did you hear me? You need to go home. There is nothing more anyone can do here. Staying here, giving people false hope. It's cruel to yourself and to them." Clara finally turned her head, her gaze meeting the captain's. "He's still out there," she said, her voice a raw whisper, yet filled with a conviction that defied all logic. "I can feel it." A flicker of frustration crossed Rostova's face. This was what she hated most, the denial, the refusal to accept the cold, hard facts of the ocean. In front of the remaining cameras and volunteers, she made her final, public pronouncement. "Ma'am, with all due respect, feelings don't change the ocean's temperature. Feelings don't reverse hypothermia. I have a duty to my crew and to the reality of the situation. We are done here." It was a public dismissal of Clara's hope, a declaration that her faith was a delusion. The crowd began to disperse, their heads bowed in defeat. The captain turned her back, ready to oversee the packing up of her equipment. But Clara did not leave. She did not cry or scream. In a move that stunned the few who remained, she simply dropped the blanket from her shoulders onto the wet sand, took a step closer to the roaring waves and fell to her knees. She closed her eyes, clasped her hands and began to pray, her lips moving silently against the fury of the wind. What Captain Rostova and the world saw as a mother's final, heartbreaking denial was, in fact, an activation of a covenant. It was a direct appeal to the only authority she believed could overrule the laws of nature. A promise born from another impossible storm in another dark time many years ago. But who was this woman who dared to stand against the finality of the sea with nothing but a silent prayer? Before she was a grieving mother on a storm-swept beach, she was just Clara. Clara's life was a portrait of quiet devotion. She was a librarian in the small coastal town, a place where she was known for her gentle smile and her uncanny ability to find the perfect book for any child who walked through the door. Her home was modest, a small cottage a few blocks from the sea, filled with the scent of old books and freshly baked bread. She wasn't a person of grand gestures or loud declarations. Her faith was the gentle, steady rhythm of her life, as constant as the tides she had grown up with. Her days were structured around simple acts of service. She organized story time for the local children, tended to the community garden behind the library, and cared for her son Leo with a fierce and tender love. He was her world, a bright, curious boy who had inherited her love for stories and his father's adventurous spirit. The people of her town knew her as a kind soul, a devout woman who attended the small, white-steepled church every Sunday. But they didn't know the story behind her faith. They didn't know why, on the first day of every month, she would walk to the old lighthouse at the edge of town and spend an hour in silent prayer, no matter the weather. They didn't understand the source of the serene strength that seemed to anchor her, even now, in the face of an unimaginable loss. This trip to the beach had started as a celebration. It was Leo's 7th birthday, and his one wish was to have a picnic by the ocean, to fly the new kite his father had built for him. His father, a fisherman named Daniel, was out on a 3-day trip, but he had made Clara promise to take Leo to his favorite spot. The weather reports had been clear in the morning, but a sudden, unforecasted squall had ambushed the coast in the afternoon. The waves, once gentle, had turned into angry, churning monsters. Clara had been packing up their things, her back to the water, for only a moment when she heard a cry that was not one of joy. She turned to see the colorful kite tumbling through the air alone. A rogue wave, larger and more violent than the rest, had surged up the beach and snatched her son, pulling him into its powerful, icy grip. Her desperate calls to the Coast Guard had launched the massive search. For hours she had watched helicopters and boats crisscross the grey waters, her hope a flickering candle against a hurricane of reality. She had answered the captain's questions with a mechanical calm, describing what Leo was wearing, his height, his weight. But when Captain Rostova had tried to prepare her for the worst, citing statistics and survival times, Clara had simply looked at her and said, "Your numbers don't account for God." It was a statement Rostova had dismissed as shock and denial. But it wasn't denial. It was a declaration of war. A war Clara was waging not against the captain or her crew, but against the very laws of nature that claimed her son was gone forever. Her faith was not a blind hope. It was a weapon she had, forged in the heart of another storm, a time when she had faced the abyss and made a promise that had changed the course of her life. What Captain Rostova, with all her experience and equipment, could never see was that Clara was not standing on that beach alone. She was standing on a foundation of solid rock, a faith that had been tested by a storm far greater than this one. Her belief was not born from the flimsy hope of a desperate mother. It was born from a covenant, a promise forged in the heart of a tempest that had already tried and failed to break her 15 years ago. The memory was as vivid as the salt spray on her face. She was a young woman then, newly married to Daniel, a man who seemed to be a part of the sea itself. He was a fisherman, his hands calloused from ropes and nets, his skin weathered by sun and wind. He had a laugh that was as deep and rumbling as the ocean on a calm day. Clara, a lover of books and quiet gardens, was his anchor to the land. They were a perfect balance of adventure and peace. Their faith at the time was a comfortable, inherited thing, a part of their small-town culture, a quiet rhythm of Sunday, services and bedtime prayers. It was a gentle stream, not yet the raging river it would become. The day it all changed began with a sky of perfect, cloudless blue. Daniel was preparing for a 2-day trip, a routine run to the fishing grounds offshore. Clara felt a strange, unexplainable unease, a small cold knot in her stomach that she couldn't rationalize. "The sea looks too calm today," she had said, a phrase that made Daniel laugh. "Clara, my love, that's what a fisherman prays for," he'd said, kissing her forehead before heading out, his silhouette a strong, confident figure against the rising sun. The first day passed in peaceful routine, but on the second day, the day he was due to return, the world changed. The sky, without warning, turned a bruised, angry purple. A storm, which the forecasters had sworn was hundreds of miles away, turned and lunged at their coastline with shocking speed and violence. The wind began to shriek, and the sea, which had been so calm, rose up in a fury. Clara was at home, the windows rattling in their frames, her heart pounding in sync with the storm. She tried the ship-to-shore radio, her knuckles white as she gripped the microphone. At first there was only static, a sound that mimicked the chaos in her own mind. Then his voice crackled through, broken and fighting the storm. "Clara? Can you hear me? The storm, as it came out of nowhere." His voice, usually so calm and steady, was tight with strain. "Daniel, where are you? Are you coming in?" she pleaded, her voice trembling. "Trying, my love. But the waves, they're like mountains. I've never seen anything like it. The Sea Serpent is a good boat, but this is something else." For the next hour they remained connected by that fragile thread of radio waves. Clara sat huddled in their small living room, a helpless witness to her husband's battle. She listened as his reports grew more dire. "The engine just quit. I'm taking on water, Clara. The waves are coming over the bow." She could hear the terror creeping into his voice, the sound of breaking glass, the groaning protest of the boat's hull. She gave him weather reports, tried to keep his spirits up, her words feeling so small and useless against the roar of the storm. "Just hold on, Daniel. The Coast Guard is on its way. Just hold on." And then came the final transmission. The static was almost overwhelming, but his voice cut through one last time, filled not with terror but with a strange, heartbreaking calm. "Clara, it's breaking up. The boat is breaking up. I don't think... Clara, I love you. Always. If we have kids, tell them their father loved the sea, but he loved you more." And then nothing, only the hiss of static, a dead, empty sound that was the definitive sound of the end. Clara screamed his name into the microphone until her throat was raw, but the only reply was the roaring of the storm outside. The world collapsed into a single point of unbearable pain. The Coast Guard search began, a brave but futile effort against a sea that was still raging. After 2 days, with no sign of the boat or of Daniel, the search was officially called off. The captain at the time, a man with tired, sad eyes, had delivered the news with professional finality. "No one could survive in those conditions, ma'am. We are truly sorry for your loss." The world declared her a widow. Friends and family came, bringing casseroles and condolences. They spoke in hushed, pitying tones. They told her to be strong, to move on, that time would heal. But their words were meaningless. Time was not a healer. It was a tormentor, each ticking second a reminder of her loss. Her quiet, comfortable faith shattered into a million pieces. She was furious with a God who would allow such a good man, her man, to be swallowed by the very sea he loved. For a week, she existed in a fog of grief. She didn't eat. She didn't sleep. The storm outside had passed, but the storm inside her only grew stronger. On the 7th night after Daniel's disappearance, she reached her breaking point. The house felt like a tomb filled with the ghost of his laughter. She couldn't breathe. In a fit of despair, she fled the house and ran, not knowing where she was going, her bare feet pounding on the wet sand of the beach. She ran until she reached the old lighthouse at the edge of town, the same place Daniel had proposed to her. The waves were calm now, their gentle lapping a cruel mockery of the violence that had stolen her husband. She collapsed onto the sand, her body shaking with sobs, and she screamed at the dark, indifferent ocean. She screamed at the silent, watching stars, and finally she screamed at God. "Why?" she cried out, her voice raw and broken. "Why did you take him from me? What was the point? Was it a test? Did I fail? I hate you. Do you hear me? I hate you for what you've done." She lay there, exhausted, empty, the anger finally spent, leaving behind only a vast hollow ache. And in that hollow place, in the deepest silence of her soul, a thought arose. It wasn't a voice, but a clear, cold realization. The men had given up. The world had given up. Her anger had changed nothing. There was only one power left in the universe that she had not truly appealed to. With a strength she didn't know she possessed, she pushed herself up to her knees. The wet sand was cold against her skin. She looked out at the infinite expanse of the dark water, and she made her stand. This was not the polite, memorized prayer of her youth. This was a raw, desperate negotiation with the creator of the universe. "God," she began, her voice steady now, filled with a new, terrifying intensity. "I don't know if you are listening. I don't know if you even care. The experts, the men in uniform, they say he is gone. They say it is impossible for him to be alive. They have their charts, their search grids, their probabilities. They say the case is closed. She took a deep, shuddering breath. But you command this ocean. You tell the waves where to stop. You put the stars in the sky. Their impossible is nothing to you. So I am coming to you now, not as a good, faithful woman, because I have not been. I have doubted. I have been angry. I am coming to you as a desperate woman with nothing left to lose. She stretched her hands out towards the sea. I am making a covenant with you, a vow. You bring him back to me. You return Daniel to this shore, alive. Not as a memory, not as a story I tell our future children, but as the man I married. You defy their logic, and you bring him home. And if you do this, if you perform this miracle, my life is no longer my own, it is yours. Her voice gained power with every word. A solemn oath declared to the heavens, I will dedicate my entire existence to you. I will be your living proof. I will raise my children to know your name and to understand what you did here tonight. I will serve you in whatever way you see fit for all the days of my life. I will never ever doubt you again. My life will be a monument to this moment. This is my promise, she concluded, her voice dropping to a fierce whisper. But you must act. Show them, show me. Prove that you are the God who still parts the waters. After she spoke, she remained kneeling, the sound of the gentle waves the only response. But a strange, profound peace began to settle over her, a calm that pushed back the storm inside her. It was the peace of surrender, of having laid everything on the line. She went home, and for the first time in a week she slept. The next few days were a blur. She began the grim task of dealing with Daniel's affairs, the world treating her with the gentle pity reserved for widows. But a tiny, defiant spark of faith remained lit within her. On the 5th day, the phone rang. It was the Coast Guard. A cargo ship hundreds of miles off course in the Atlantic had found something. A lone survivor, clinging to a piece of his boat's wreckage, barely conscious but alive. It was Daniel. When she saw him in the hospital, he was battered, dehydrated, but miraculously whole. He told her a story that made the hairs on her arms stand up. He said that after the radio went dead and the boat was torn apart, he was sure he was going to die. But as he clung to a piece of the hull in the raging storm, he felt a strange sense of calm, an inexplicable feeling of not being alone, as if a bubble of peace had formed around him in the middle of the chaos. He had floated for 4 days, long, past the point of survivability, until the ship found him. Clara knew. It wasn't luck. It wasn't a statistical anomaly. It was a covenant, honored. God had heard her cry from the beach and had commanded the sea to spare her husband. From that day forward, her faith was no longer a belief. It was knowledge. It was the bedrock of her soul. And it was this absolute, proven certainty that now allowed her to kneel on another beach, 15 years later, and pray for another miracle, refusing to believe that the God who had once calmed the storm would now be defeated by a single wave. And it was the memory of that impossible rescue, the unshakable knowledge of a God who had once overruled the ocean itself, that now anchored Clara on this windswept shore, back in the present, amidst the emergency tape and the departing crews. Her desperate prayer was turning into a quiet war of faith. The sun had now fully risen, casting a cold grey light over the scene. Most of the volunteers had heeded the captain's orders and departed, their faces etched with sorrow and resignation. The news crews were packing up their cameras, their story having reached its sad, predictable conclusion. All that remained was a skeleton crew of Coast Guard personnel and a few stubborn onlookers, watching the strange spectacle of the lone woman kneeling at the water's edge. Captain Eva Rostova stood by her command vehicle, her arms crossed, watching. Clara with a mixture of pity and professional annoyance. She had given the order to stand down, her job was done, but she couldn't leave. Something about the woman's silent defiance held her there, a silent challenge to her entire world of protocols and probabilities. "She's in shock," Rostova said, to her second-in-command, a young lieutenant. "It's a textbook case of denial. She'll exhaust herself and then we can get her the help she needs." "With all due respect, Captain, the lieutenant replied, his eyes also fixed on Clara. "I've seen shock. This feels different. It's like she's not just hoping. It's like she's waiting." Rostova scoffed, but the lieutenant's words had found a crack in her certainty. She hated this part of the job, the raw, messy emotions that couldn't be contained by procedure. She looked at her watch. The tide would be turning soon. The window for any kind of recovery, even a tragic one, was closing. On the beach, Clara was oblivious to their scrutiny. The world had narrowed to the space between her and the horizon. Her prayer was no longer a frantic plea. It had become a deep, focused communion, a silent wrestling. The words of her covenant made 15 years ago echoed in her soul. "My life. Here's yours. I will be your living proof." This was it. This was the test of that vow. She wasn't just praying for Leo's return. She was holding God to his promise. She was reminding him of the bargain they had struck under the light of the old lighthouse. Her prayer was a powerful, focused appeal. "You are the God who does not forget. You are the God of Daniel's storm. You are the God of my son, Leo. You. Do not begin a miracle and leave it unfinished. Command this sea as you did before. Bring him home." Her focus was so absolute that she didn't notice one of the reporters, a young, ambitious journalist named Ben, approaching her. He saw a final, human interest angle for his story. He knelt a few feet away, his camera off, but his microphone recording. "Ma'am," he began softly. "Clara, I can't imagine what you're going through. Is there anything you want to say? A message for Leo?" Clara slowly opened her eyes. They were not filled with tears, but with a startling, fiery intensity. She looked at the young man. "My message is not for my son," she said, her voice clear and strong despite the wind. "My message is for the one who holds my son in his hands." Ben was taken aback by her directness. This wasn't the broken victim he had expected. Then, Clara did something that sent a chill down his spine. She turned her gaze from the reporter back to the ocean and spoke, her voice rising above the sound of the waves, not in a shout, but in a tone of command. "As for my son," she declared, as if making a legal pronouncement, "he is protected by the covenant of his family. He is covered by the 91st Psalm. He will not be overcome by the flood. The angel of the Lord is with him. He will return." The sheer unshakable certainty in her voice was stunning. It wasn't hope, it was a statement of fact. Captain Rostova, hearing this from a distance, shook her head in disbelief. This had gone beyond denial. It was a public delusion. But then, as if in response to Clara's declaration, the radio on Rostova's belt crackled to life, breaking the tense standoff. It was a voice she didn't recognize, not one of her crew. It was a choppy, civilian signal from a fishing boat far offshore. "Mayday, Mayday. This is the Morning Star. We're about 20 miles northeast of the search grid. You're not going to believe this. We've found something in the water." The crackle of the radio was like a lightning strike on the quiet beach. Captain Rostova, who had been on the verge of ordering her final crew members to pack up, froze mid-motion. Every person left on that shore, the reporters, the weary volunteers, the stoic Coast Guard crew, turned their heads toward the source of the sound. The voice on the radio, tinny and laced with static, was filled with a frantic disbelief that was instantly contagious. Rostova snatched the radio from her belt, her professionalism snapping back into place. "This is Coast Guard Captain Rostova. Unidentified vessel, please repeat your transmission." "What have you found?" she demanded, her voice sharp and authoritative. There was a pause, filled with the hiss of an open channel and the distant thrum of a boat's engine. Then the voice came back, belonging to an old fisherman whose tone was a mixture of weathered calm and pure, unadulterated shock. "Captain, my name is Silas. I'm on the Morning Star. We were heading back in, way outside your search area. We saw something floating. We thought it was debris, maybe from a buoy." He paused again, as if struggling to find the words. "But it wasn't debris. Captain, it's a boy. He's alive." The words landed on the beach like a physical blow. A collective gasp went through the small crowd. Ben, the young reporter, fumbled to turn his camera back on. his journalistic instincts battling with the sheer awe of the moment. Captain Rostova stood ramrod straight, her knuckles white on the radio, her mind refusing to process the information. "That's impossible, Morningstar," she shot back, her training taking over. "The water temperature is 48 degrees. No child could survive for more than an hour, let alone 12. Are you certain? Describe him." "He's small, maybe 7 or 8 years old," Silas's voice crackled. "He's wearing a red jacket and blue jeans. He was clinging to a piece of driftwood, a big, strange piece, almost like it was shaped to hold him. He's hypothermic, barely conscious, but he's breathing. We've pulled him aboard. He's wrapped in every blanket we have." Red jacket, blue jeans. It was Leo. A cry erupted from the back of the crowd, a sound of pure, unbridled joy. But Clara did not cry out. She simply rose to her feet, her prayer finished. She stood facing the ocean, her hands still clasped, her face turned up towards the grey sky. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, but her expression was one of profound, bone-deep peace. Her fight was over. Her king had answered. On the radio, Rostova was now a whirlwind of efficiency, her mind grappling with the impossible reality while her training dictated the next steps. "Silas, what are your coordinates? I need your exact position. We're dispatching a helicopter for immediate medical evacuation. Keep him warm, keep him talking if you can." "That's the other thing, Captain," Silas said, his voice now filled with a sense of wonder. "He's not just talking, he's singing." "Singing?" Rostova repeated, the words sounding absurd. "What is he singing?" "I don't know the song," Silas replied. "It's a simple tune. He keeps whispering it over and over, something about he who dwells in the secret place of the Most High." It was the first line of the 91st Psalm, the very psalm Clara had declared over her son moments before. Ben, the reporter, his camera now rolling, swung it from the frantic activity of the Coast Guard back to Clara. He expected to see a mother overcome with emotion, perhaps collapsing with relief. But what he saw was far more powerful. Clara was standing tall, a figure of serene and absolute strength against the backdrop of the wild sea. It was as if the storm had finally bowed to her. She looked not like a victim who had been granted a reprieve, but like a queen who had just received news of a victory she had known was always coming. The sound of helicopter rotors began to beat in the distance, growing louder and louder. Captain Rostova was barking orders, coordinating the most unbelievable rescue of her long and storied career. Her world of charts, probabilities, and certainties had been completely and irrevocably shattered. The 0% probability of survival was now a living, breathing, singing boy being pulled from the sea 20 miles from where he should have been. The helicopter appeared over the horizon, a modern chariot sent to retrieve the boy the ocean had been forced to surrender. As it hovered over the coordinates of the morning star, a ray of sunlight, the first of the day, broke through the thick grey clouds and illuminated the stretch of water where Leo had been found. It was a single, perfect beam of light, like a divine spotlight on the stage of a miracle. Captain Rostova lowered her radio, her hand trembling slightly. She looked from the impossible scene unfolding at sea to the woman standing on the shore. Her scientific mind was desperately searching for an explanation, a freak warm current, a life-saving piece of debris, a child with an unheard-of resistance to cold. But her heart, for the first time in years, was whispering a different word, a word she had always dismissed: miracle. But as the helicopter began its journey back to shore, carrying the impossible proof of her faith, all eyes on the beach turned to Clara. They expected a celebration, a rush of relief, a triumphant declaration. Instead, she did something that left them even more stunned. She simply bowed her head. The small crowd, now re-energized and buzzing with the news, began to converge on her. Ben, the reporter, was the first to reach her, his microphone extended, his face a mixture of journalistic hunger and genuine astonishment. "Clara, it's incredible. Your son is alive. How do you feel? What can you say about this miracle?" Other voices joined in. "You never gave up. Your faith saved him. It's the story of the year." They were treating her like a hero, a performer who had successfully completed an impossible feat. They wanted to put her on a pedestal, to celebrate her strength, her faith, her victory. But Clara gently raised a hand, not to accept their praise, but to quiet them. She looked at the faces surrounding her, faces filled with wonder and excitement, and she saw an opportunity not for glory, but for truth. "Please," she said, her voice soft, but carrying a weight that commanded their attention. "What happened today, it was not about me." She turned her gaze to Captain Rostova, who had walked over and now stood at the edge of the crowd, her face a complicated mask of disbelief and a newfound, grudging respect. "Captain," Clara said, her voice filled with a gentle, disarming grace, "you told me there was a 0% chance. Your charts, your experience, your science, it all said my son was gone, and you were not wrong. According to the laws of this world, you were absolutely right." She paused, letting the statement hang in the air. "But you see, my prayer was not an appeal to the laws of this world. It was an appeal to the one who wrote them. I did not ask for my son to be saved because I am special, or because my faith is stronger than anyone else's. I asked because of a promise made to me long ago and a promise I made in return." Her eyes swept over the small crowd. "We look for heroes in moments like this. We want to credit the person, the prayer, the power of positive thinking. But the glory does not belong to the person who asks. It belongs to the one who answers. What you witnessed today was not the power of a mother's love. It was the power of a loving father's mercy." She walked toward Captain Rostova, closing the distance between them. The captain, a woman who commanded ships and crews in the fiercest storms, seemed almost small in the face of Clara's serene authority. "Your job is to trust in what you can see and measure," Clara said kindly, without a hint of accusation. Our job is to trust in what is unseen." Today, for a moment, those two worlds touched. This was not for my sake, Captain. It was a reminder for all of us. A reminder that the ocean is vast and powerful, but the one who holds the oceans in the palm of his hand is infinitely more so. She offered no "I told you so." She made no demand for an apology for the public dismissal. Her victory was so complete, so absolute, that it required no fanfare. The lesson she taught on that beach was as clear and bright as the beam of sunlight that had illuminated her son's rescue. True faith doesn't seek to be proven right. It seeks only to give glory to the source of its strength. Those words, delivered with a humility as powerful as the miracle itself, landed in the heart of Captain Eva Rostova and began to dismantle a lifetime of rigid certainty. She, a woman who navigated by radar and sonar, was now navigating an inner territory for which she had no charts. The helicopter landed softly on a cleared stretch of the beach, its rotors winding down. The paramedics rushed forward, but they were met with a sight that defied their emergency training. A small boy wrapped in blankets was sitting up on the stretcher, talking to the fisherman, Silas. He was weak and cold, but he was alert, and, miraculously, he was whole. As Leo was reunited with his mother in an embrace that seemed to heal the very air around them, Captain Rostova watched no longer as an official, but as a witness. Her entire career had been built on a foundation of predictable outcomes, on the cold, hard math of survival. She had seen the sea claim hundreds of lives, and it had always followed the same relentless rules. Until today. Today, the rules had been broken. She walked over to Clara, who was now holding her son, her face buried in his hair, whispering words of love and thanks. The captain waited patiently until Clara looked up. "I have been a captain in the Coast Guard for 22 years. Rostova began, her voice losing its official clipped tone, becoming something more personal, more vulnerable. "I have seen the worst that the ocean can do. I have delivered heartbreaking news to more families than I can count. I have always believed that we are all just subject to the elements, luck, skill, and the unforgiving laws of nature. That's all there was." She shook her head slowly, a look of profound confusion and wonder on her face. "Today I saw something else. I don't have a category for it in my reports. There's no box to check for what happened here. I publicly dismissed you. I called. Your hope a delusion. And I have never been more wrong in my entire life. She took a deep breath, the admission costing her professional pride, but bringing a strange sense of relief. I don't know what I believe even now. My mind is still trying to find a logical explanation, but I know what I saw, and I know what I heard. You declared your son was protected by a psalm, and a fisherman 20 miles away heard him singing it. That is not a coincidence. Clara simply smiled, a gentle, understanding smile. It's okay not to understand, Captain. Faith isn't about having all the answers. It's about trusting the one who does. Rostova nodded, a gesture of surrender. Your story, the official report, will be a media sensation, but the real story is what happened here, on this beach. Is there anything we can do for you? Anything. At all. It was an offer of commendation, of official support, a way for the system to try and make sense of the event. You've already done it, Captain, Clara replied, pulling the blanket tighter around Leo. You brought my son home, that is all I ever wanted. She looked at the crew, at the volunteers, at the captain herself. The only thing I ask is that you don't forget this day, when you are out there in the middle of a storm, and the numbers. Tell you all hope is lost, remember today. Remember that there is a power greater than the storm. With that, Clara, holding her son tightly, walked towards the waiting ambulance, not for emergency care, but for a simple checkup. She left behind a seasoned Coast Guard captain standing on the shore, staring out at a sea that no longer looked the same. It was no longer just a body of water governed by predictable laws. It was now a place of profound and unsettling mystery, a place where the impossible had just become possible. The news crews left, the emergency tape was taken down, and the beach returned to its natural windswept state. But for those who stood there that day, the world was forever different. The story of Leo's rescue became a quiet legend in the small, coastal town, a whispered reminder of the day the sea gave back what it had stolen. Captain Eva Rostova continued her distinguished career, but her crews noticed a change. A new humility, a quiet respect for the mysteries that lay beyond her charts and instruments. She never filed a report that mentioned a miracle, but she carried the memory of that day as her own private truth. And Clara? She sought no headlines. Her life returned to its simple, beautiful rhythm of books, gardens, and her son. Her reward was not fame, but the sound of Leo's laughter filling their small cottage. She had made a promise in the heart of a storm, and in her moment of greatest need, God had proven once again that He is always faithful. If this story of a mother's unyielding faith and a God who commands the waves has touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe for more powerful Christian stories. Each one is a testament that when human logic reaches its end, God's grace is just beginning.